All right, let's talk about movies.
Houston, we have a problem.
Roads? Where we're going, we don't need roads.
Who are you?
Reboots and remakes, the stale new age of Hollywood. No one's doing anything original anymore. It's all about redoing what's already been done or making sequels to properties that exist. There's a lot of reasons for this.
You know, you read what others had done, and you took the next step. You didn't earn the knowledge for yourselves, so you don't take any responsibility.
IP, intellectual property. That is the key to getting people into movie theaters these days. Are you going to see whatever movie is starring whichever movie star of the week? No. You're going to see the Avengers, Spider-Man, Batman.
He does that.
Maybe not Superman. I give Henry Cavill a Man of Steel too.
But it has to be on my own terms.
The thing is, movie studios, the money, they realize that properties sell these days. So we feel like we're getting fed the same meal day after day, year after year. But what if I told you that wasn't really anything new? That reboots, remakes, sequels, they've mostly always existed in one way or another. All you have to do to figure this out is look back at one of the most classic movies of our time, The Wizard of Oz. Now, The Wizard of Oz, turns out, is a remake. The original was a silent film and black and white, and it had none of the hallmarks that we know now to be classic. But what happened was they saw an opportunity to tell their story, and they took it. Now, the way Hollywood worked back then was a studio had a property, they had their stars, and the directors were really there to get the studio vision out there. It's not too dissimilar to what you see today with Marvel. However, I'd argue that Kevin Feige cares about his director's visions. He's just trying to find a way to fit it into his overarching narrative. Now, back then, there were, I think, 5 directors that worked on The Wizard of Oz, and they all brought varying degrees of vision to it, of course, because that's what directors do. But in the end, it was all about what the studio wanted done, what MGM wanted to see out of the film. But it was still a unique vision compared to what you'd seen before in the earlier version of The Wizard of Oz, which I've never seen. Have you seen it? Because I've never seen it. And that's probably because there was really nothing special about it. Now, you can go back and you could see older films that have been told one way and then told another. Just look at The Beauty and the Beast. There was an old black and white version that is considered classic auteur cinema. But that didn't stop Disney from creating their animated classic. But it also didn't stop Disney from creating their live action of the animated classic that was basically the same movie, just with a few extra songs and a lot more auto-tune. I love Emma Watson, but please. Now, this is what most people today consider a reboot or a remake. They take the script, they take the idea of a classic film, and then they just kind of rehash it. So this is what we all think when they say they're going to do a new version of something. That we're just rehashing the same thing we've done before. That's already been done. I can just pop in the Blu-ray, I can pop in the DVD, I can stream it on Disney Plus, HBO Max, Netflix, whatever. Why are you doing this again? But what if I told you there's been plenty of reboots, remakes, sequels that have all worked? That's because of one thing. One simple little thing. The storytellers had something to say. Or at the very least, they had a unique perspective on the story. Take, for instance, Star Trek. Now, Star Trek is a property that many fans, myself included, have been fans of since they were children. It's a fandom that has lasted since the 60s. And it's very influential, not just on films, but on technology and science in general. Think about your iPad or any tablet you have. I'm pretty sure that Star Trek played a big part in trying to make that happen. Hell, there was an actual spaceship called the Enterprise to pay homage to Star Trek and all that they helped to do to inspire space race. The thing about Star Trek is when a property has been going on since the 60s, they're bound to hit some speed bumps and have some issues. And they did a great job of kind of doing reboots on TV. When you think about The Next Generation, it is a reboot. It is taking the concept and giving it new life. I mean, at that point, Star Trek was basically a cult property. Something you watch in syndication on TV. I mean, they had animated versions, but those characters, we've moved on. And then they found a way to do it differently. And from there, they built a whole universe of doing it differently. Deep Space Nine was a completely different show eventually compared to The Next Generation. And Voyager, love it or hate it, was a new concept. This new idea. It was like Lost in Space, but with Star Trek.
If these sensors are working, we're over 70,000 light years from where we were. We're on the other side of the galaxy.
So of course, that extended to the films when they eventually gave the Next Generation cast their own pictures. But even that concept kind of got old, and audiences weren't that interested in following the ongoing adventures of Picard and his crew anymore. Which, of course, we fast forward now to the day of streaming, and Picard is a popular Star Trek show, continuing those stories. But between that moment when Star Trek Nemesis looked like the Death Note in Star Trek, and shows like Picard taking off now, you had an opportunity. An opportunity to bring Star Trek back to the big screen in a new way. And in walks J.J. Abrams. Now, I'm torn on J.J. Abrams as a director. I think he's produced a lot of really memorable and amazing things. But he's also lacks some originality. And he knows how to direct a film. He knows how to make things memorable. He knows how to get his actors to give great performances. Rise of Skywalker is an amazing example of how to get great performances and give great direction, but lose something in the process when trying to please fans with fan service and really not trying to have unique perspective.
Who are you? I'm Ray. Ray who?
However, with Star Trek, he found a way to reboot a franchise in a really cool way. Now, there's a lot of people that are torn about that first Star Trek movie that J.J. Abrams did. The thing is, it does feel like a space adventure. It feels like a little bit of Star Wars because of the battles and all the explosions and, well, I mean, people die. So, what makes it good? J.J. Abrams had a new view of how to tell a Star Trek story. Now, a lot of the stuff we love in Star Trek was there. There was a lot of that heady, thoughtful space exploration present. It was just wrapped in this big summer blockbuster like packaging. And that's what J.J. Abrams brought to the story. And the unique thing he did is he said, listen, this is what we're doing with Star Trek. However, we're going to use something from Star Trek that doesn't really make it a reboot, but more of an offshoot. What J.J. Abrams did, him and his writing team and production team, is they said, we're going to go ahead and use time travel so we can completely change the timeline. The Kelvin timeline, as it's called, create a whole new set of stories that could be told with Kirk and the Enterprise crew. Now, J.J. Abrams knew he had to capture the spirit and the essence of those relationships, so he did a great job with casting. And then he knew that he had to make sure the Enterprise felt like the Enterprise, while also giving it this new J.J. Abrams spin. The lens flare, the huge, shining light that J.J. Abrams loved to use in that. Literally had someone standing there with a light on screen to create the lens flare. That was his way of bringing a different sci-fi look to Star Trek. Even though it's been parodied and memed, I argue that that's because he was successful in bringing something unique to the story. And it worked really well because he walked this line of fan service of trying to say, this is the Star Trek you remember, while also saying, but it's not quite what you remember. It's something new. Things are not exactly what they seem. And honestly, he nailed it. He took stuff from canon and did his own twist on it, and that's an important factor in making a good reboot or remake. You have to have your take. If you don't, then it might feel soulless. It might feel a little bit empty. I'd argue that The Force Awakens, even though I enjoy it, falls flat at times because it just feels like he wants to do A New Hope all over again. And then, after he took a break for Episode 8, no matter how you feel about that film, I like The Last Jedi. It's a really good movie. when JJ came back for episode 9, there was something that wasn't there. There was no vision. There was no take on really where he wanted the story to go or what he wanted to say. It was just a return to mystery box filmmaking. If you don't know, J.J. Abrams, he has this philosophy. You go into a magic shop and there's this thing called a mystery box, and you buy it, and it's for a certain price, and you get it, and whatever's inside is inside. But the fun part was not knowing. So he brought that to a lot of things. And when you don't know the answer to the mystery, sometimes it's a disappointing ending.
Where'd you get that?
A good question. For another time.
He brought that philosophy to The Force Awakens, and when it came time to pay it off in Rise of Skywalker, he didn't actually have an answer because he didn't have a vision. He didn't have a roadmap of where he wanted to go. And that's what makes Star Trek really special. He knew what he wanted to accomplish. He wanted to start in this one place with the Enterprise crew and have them end fully formed and ready to go on their adventures in space together. And he knew that he wanted to make it something exciting for him because he really wasn't a huge Star Trek fan. His writers were in love with it. They loved Star Trek. The producing team behind it, they were Star Trek fans. But JJ himself, while he appreciated it, he was not a Star Trek guy. But that helped him inform a new vision for the franchise to take, and it made it an exciting reboot. And even though I'd say the sequel that he did was a misstep, I think when you put it in the hands of Star Trek Beyond and you let another filmmaker have a vision of the story they want to tell, it made for great results. And hopefully they're continuing that. But you say that's only one example. What other reboots could possibly be that good? Let's take a look at J.J. Abrams' friend and co-creator of Felicity, their TV show, Matt Reeves. Now, Matt Reeves is a filmmaker that's quietly been doing great stuff for, well, decades. He's a filmmaker that has a vision. He did Cloverfield, and Cloverfield is one of those unique examples of a found footage film, which, once again, it's a genre that got stale because people kept trying the same things, and what he and J.J. Abrams decided to try was, hey, what if we did a monster movie this way? What if we had big effects and we shrouded in mystery, and it worked great, and it created a lot of really wonderful careers in the process. So what did Matt Reeves reboot? You may be asking. I mean, the upcoming The Batman is a reboot, and honestly, it looks great, but we can't really judge that yet.
I'm vengeance.
But he was a part of a really great reboot that no one expected to be good, and that is Planet of the Apes. Now, he did not do the first Planet of the Apes, Rise of the Planet of the Apes, which was a really good movie. But even with that film in the can and the new direction forged, there was still a possibility of falling back into this idea of, well, we need to make it feel like Planet of the Apes. It needs to feel like the movies that we did in the past. When Tim Burton did his version, one of the biggest problems was that it didn't distinguish itself enough, and it felt very much like we need to do this, we need to do that, we need to do all this stuff that is a nod to what they've done before, but do it a little different. You know, there was a messaging about guns and things like that, and they had Charlton Heston show up, not as his human character, but dressed up as an ape and talking about how great guns are, because NRA. But on top of that, it just felt flat. The message wasn't clear. What were they trying to say in this film? Tim Burton just wanted to do his version of what came before, and he didn't really nail anything about it. There was clear messaging. There was a clear vision with the original Planet of the Apes. Tim Burton just felt like, what if we did it now? What if we did it in the late 90s? And, you know, the makeup looked a little better. Sure. But what happened with this new reboot, and what Matt Reeves did, especially with it, is they decided to shift the perspective. They had something to say, and their new main character was not a person. It was an ape. And Andy Serkis, master of motion capture, he came in and he played Caesar with gravitas. This was a Shakespearean tragedy. This man, this leader, this ape, this leader, he was leading his people to freedom. He has wanted freedom Now, the first movie does a great job of establishing these things. Starts off really well. James Franco's terrific in it, but it's really soft in the story it's trying to tell, and it does a great job. And credit should be given to Rupert Wyatt because he did have a vision and he did create a story that was special. But what Matt Reeves did is he took that jumping off point, and instead of saying, let's go and just redo Planet of the Apes now because, well, the flu's happened, the apes are clearly ready to take over, we can go ahead and just go right to that and shift it back to apes bad, men good. No, instead he showed the struggle. He showed how they're trying to connect. He took this idea and the technology they used to do the first film and he expanded on it, and he made this beautiful, beautiful movie twice, because war is amazing. And it arguably goes to a point to where you can treat it as prequels to the original Planet of the Apes, because it ends in a place where they're just about to start the civilization, and you know familiar characters from it, but they're brought in an organic way. That's how you do it. When you have an idea, when you have new technology, but you say, we can use this to tell our story better, not just update what was there before, that's when something special happens. And that's the thing about rebooting or trying to remake a story. If you have a new way to say the same thing, it can feel really fresh and fun. Like if your heart is in this thing, people notice. And I argue that trilogy, both what Rupert Wyatt did, but definitely what Matt Reeves had done, they really show a lot of heart. They care about the characters. It's not just, you know what Planet of the Apes is, so watch our movie. They care. And that's the number one thing. When you're making a movie, no matter what it is, reboot, remake, sequel, or something original, people need to know that you care. You give a crap about the story and the characters in it. So that's definitely one of the keys to making a reboot. But, you know, there are other properties. I'd say there's one that's ape adjacent that works very well, and that's King Kong.
King Kong ain't got shit on me!
Now, King Kong has been around very long time, and it has not always been successful trying to bring him to the big screen. I'd say most of the time it's missed the mark because things haven't aged well, or the idea was basically take the big ape, tell the same story, it's fine. We don't need to change much up, it's cool, great. But when you get someone like Peter Jackson involved, that's when you might have an opportunity to tell a story. Now, Peter Jackson, he was the perfect guy to make the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Why? Because he's a huge Tolkien fan, and he loved the books. He just wanted to bring what he saw in his head to the big screen, and he did it in the right way. In his heart, he knew that this story had to be just as big as every moment that he saw up here, and he made it happen. And honestly, you could argue that The Lord of the Rings is a reboot, considering there was the animated version. You can argue that The Hobbit is a reboot, but, well, The Hobbit was a bit of a mess. But that is a great example of how you can have a director who has a vision, has a great idea, and the studio lets him bring that to life with the proper timing and gravitas the story deserves, and it can work. Versus, you can have too many cooks in the kitchen. I mean, The Hobbit had Guillermo del Toro attached to direct at one point, and there was a lot of the stuff that he did still in the movie because they rushed it along with Peter Jackson. They said, we need you to finish this movie because Guillermo can't do it. And also, it's not a movie now, it's 2, and then eventually it was 3, and that's something that is really important. If you're gonna helm a reboot, you need to know what you're doing and not have other people dictate what it's gonna be. But we're not talking about Tolkien, we're talking about King Kong. And what Peter Jackson did was both good and bad, I'd say, with King Kong. He knew that the story he wanted to tell had a lot of heart. He knew it was a romance. He fell in love with that original King Kong movie when he was a kid, and he brought that tale to life. It was a reimagining of the same moments. The same era was told, but with a new perspective. And yes, it's overly long, and there's so much going on, and maybe the comedy doesn't always land, and the CGI can be a bit of a mess, but that's because he was pushing it to be the story that he saw in his head. And love it or hate it, it does work as a reboot. It is different, it is new, it has worth. There's a reason to watch it. And I'd argue that has continued on now with this MonsterVerse. Kong Skull Island was not something I expected to enjoy, but the filmmakers knew that they wanted to tell a new, fresh idea with Kong. They wanted to go to Skull Island and have him be the king. They wanted to be a hero. And there was a lot of villainy going on, not just among the people there that showed up, but with the crawly things. The crawly things. What?
I call them skull crawlers. Why? Because it sounds neat.
Those things. Yes, thank you. Thank you, John C. Reilly. The thing is, when you have a story to tell, when you can do something different, it will always work. You just have to care. It has to come through. Now, there's been a ton of reboots that don't necessarily work. I think if you look adjacent to King Kong, Godzilla, we don't know what works all the time. 1998's Godzilla was a disaster because it wasn't close enough to what we cared about, and it felt like they were trying to just take his name to tell a story with something else. And people know that. And I argue it's not as bad as we think it is. It's right up there with most of Roland Emmerich's work. It's fun. You can just turn off your brain and enjoy it, but it paid too much homage to stuff like Jurassic Park, and the design was not Godzilla. The 2014 movie, I think, is far better, but there are mistakes made along the way, and part of that is this whole idea of not trying to show Godzilla, treating him like Jaws, doesn't always work, and people aren't invested in the human stories, especially when you eliminate your best human character a little less than halfway through the movie. These kinds of decisions are what make or break a reboot. Now, King of Monsters is another Godzilla film that people thought didn't work. I enjoyed it a lot, and I think there were some great monster fights, but there's a balance to what people want to see and what they don't. And there's a balance between trying to have a story to tell and universe building with these things that needs to be addressed. What made Kong Skull Island work, or if we're going to go back to Peter Jackson and King Kong work, is that they had a story to tell. It wasn't just setting up more in a universe. It wasn't there just to say, okay, this is a starting point. It was there to tell a complete story. And I think people realize that reboots all the time. Universal tried to do a reboot of The Mummy, but the problem was The Mummy was not a complete story. It was a backdoor pilot to the story they wanted to tell with the dark universe. And guess what? That didn't work because people don't want to watch a commercial for 2.5 hours. They want to watch your vision, your story. Gus Van Sant's Psycho is quite famous because he tried to just do exactly what Hitchcock did. Literally. He went shot for shot. And why do we want to see that? I've seen that movie already. I don't need to see it again with Vince Vaughn in the lead for some reason. I think these filmmakers take opportunities and run with them. To be fair to Gus Van Sant, it was an experiment. The budget wasn't skyrocketing through the roof. It wasn't a $100 million movie. He just wanted to try shooting the movie the exact same way with today's technology. And the thing is, no one wants to see that. Sure, it's interesting to experiment with that kind of idea, but no one wants to see the same movie twice, just told through a different lens. And in this day and age where IP is king and we're telling the same stories or using the same characters again and again, it's really important that as directors and filmmakers, we know that we can have our own take on how to create something like that. Because it's just going to get harder to create original content, especially for the big screen. Streaming services are going to always be great safe havens for your original stories and for smaller scale things that you want to say. But for that big screen, you really have to have a unique voice to bring to these properties. And I know we all feel like we're getting sick of it, but the truth is, most of the stuff coming up that looks good, and hopefully will be, are reboots, remakes, or sequels. Matt Reeves is making the Batman. And that looks like some crazy noir, almost like Batman showed up in Seven. And I'm excited about that. Even though I'm enjoying what's going on in the DCEU, seeing a different take on Batman is exciting because it's not the same take. It's not going back and doing what's been done before. Robert Pattinson's not trying to be Michael Keaton.
What are you?
I'm Batman.
Everything's different, yet it's the same. One of the reasons that Tom Holland's Spider-Man worked so well is they decided not to do the same thing as Sam Raimi. They didn't hit the same story beats. Transversely, that's why Amazing Spider-Man didn't work too great, because even though Mark Webb had his own style that he brought to the films, the story beats just felt like a rehash. I don't know, it's a crazy balance. There's a crazy, crazy balance to doing it. But that comes down to all filmmaking. Filmmaking is balance. Filmmaking is finding your viewpoint. Maybe the reason a RoboCop remake or that Total Recall or any of these Disney live action films feel like they're not great is because the studio or producers or even the director doesn't have anything to say other than people like this thing from back then, so just give them that. Instead of just letting a director say, let's give them that, except let's do it my way. So that's my take on it, but let me hear your thoughts. Please leave a comment below, and don't forget to like and subscribe, click that bell, get those notifications, and I will see you next time around. Bye.